So he's hit the start watching Take It From Tara, which is an awesome show that brings you the best and most important topics and interests of the day and the conversation with the people who are actually making those things happen. And today, I am fortunate enough to have with me 4 Manual High School students who have been deeply involved with March for Our Lives, as well as the school walkouts that were subsequent to that. So I'm very grateful for the 4 of you taking the time that you are taking, because I know how busy you are.
Thank you for having us.
I'm so grateful to have you with us. And the only thing that I'm concerned about, Michael, is that I'm not getting Facebook on my feed. Will you check and make sure that it's live? Is it? He's giving me the thumbs up. That's very strange, isn't it? As it says public, right? Okay, you're good to go. He's like, no, it's not my fault. It's your friend,
I would
Destiny.
double check. He doesn't even have a cell phone. I don't know.
He doesn't have a cell phone. Take that mic off and go look at it, Destiny. Here she goes. These are the technical stretches that we have to make sometimes. He says, is he right? He's right. He's telling the truth. She looks twice. She looks twice. I see it. We got some people who are watching already.
I don't know.
We're going to find out very quickly.
Alrighty.
So what I want to do is just a quick sound check. I'm going to start with you, Marshall.
Sound.
That was good. That was really good. Sound.
Jordan Grants.
Fonz Cervera.
No, that wasn't good.
Fonz Cervera.
Destiny Grigsby.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do is just kind of, we took a few minutes before we did this live cast to talk a little bit about these folks' lives, and you know, it's hard to call them kids. It's hard to call them young people, because they're doing the work of adults and have been, particularly since this last school shooting that took place. And so what we've done is we've already talked a little bit for about a half hour, which we'll air at a later date, just about their lives and how school safety and gun violence have affected them. So what I want to do is start by introducing the 4 of you, and I'm going to let you do it yourself. So tell us name, age, and grade in school just to get started, Destiny.
Okay. My name is Destiny Grigsby. I am 17 years old, and I'm a junior at DuPont Manual High School in YPass.
Excellent. Fonz?
I'm Fonz Cervera. I'm 18 years old, and I'm a senior at Manual.
I'm Jordan Grants. I am 18 years old. I'm a senior at Manual in the Journalism Communications magnet.
Wow.
I'm Marshall Washington. I'm 17 years old, and I'm also a senior at Manual.
Excellent. Okay, so now you know who you're dealing with, and these kids, these young people, these almost adult age-wise, but way more adult than most of us now. So what do you want me to call you? Students? That was a good one. These people have done amazing things with their lives, and now in the incredible journey that they've had just over the last few months since these school shootings have really brought the students to the forefront. So I'm going to start with you, Jordan, because as we talked about before, and it is hot as blazes in here. I don't know about you guys, but we are very, very grateful to be in Central Presbyterian Church downtown, which was a short drive for the Manual students, and also just a beautiful sanctuary. And I like the feeling of having this discussion in a kind of a neutral zone. And so we want to thank the folks at Central Pres for giving us this space, even if the air conditioning is not quite up to snuff. Let's start with you, Jordan, because you grew up in a media-oriented family, and I'd love to hear from you what your first exposure to news was and how that's changed over the years that you have lived, what your exposure to news is now.
So my mom worked for WHAS, and my dad has always worked for WFPL. And so they both have always come home and talked about the news, though they don't really talk about it extensively because they like to keep work at work and home at home.
Yes.
And so, but my mom has always talked about when she was working for WHAS about how she would have to go cover murders and fires. And so at an early age, I thought about news in a more negative light because I saw it as these things that were happening in a medium to put those ideas and broadcast those events to others.
Yes.
But now that I'm in the JNC, and when I got to Manual, my view of journalism had widely expanded. And I've realized that news can do a lot more than just tell you about what's happening around your community and in the nation. It can really expand your worldview and how you think about things, and it really helps change your perspective about things that you might not have any experience with. And so coming to Manual and learning about journalism and the ethics of journalism has really helped me. But back to your original question. Now my mom works for the Courier Journal, and she does more feature reporting. And so what I hear from her is not a lot of like the hard news. It's more about like the celebrities coming to Derby, or the new...
Which is way cool, believe me.
Yeah, I mean, she has a cool job. But she hears a lot about what's happening, and because she talks to people in the newsroom, and just her perspective about things, how they can impact, that they impact individuals, and that it's not just, oh, a person was shot. It's this person who has a family, and this person who loved basketball, and this person who loved making spaghetti has died. And so just really personalizing people and hearing about individual people's stories that horrific things have happened to is really impactful.
Fonz, when you hear about a school shooting on the news, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
So sadly, I think like a lot of people have said recently, we've kind of become numbed to hearing about school shootings and mass shootings in general. And so I feel like my first reaction is just like, oh, it's another one, you know. And for a long time, that's how it was. Just be like, oh, it's just another one, which is, you know, it's terrible, it's sad, and I think that's part of what at least like the work that we've started trying to do is kind of what one of the big things we want to combat. It's not just, you know, another school shooting. It's, holy crap, there was a school shooting, like kids are getting killed going to school, you know. So now, if I were to hear of another school shooting, you know, I'd be incredibly sad, you know. And not that I wasn't before, but I think for a long time, it was just kind of like, you know, it happened.
Yeah.
And thinking about it and, you know, putting it into words sounds so inhumane. So, you know, so, I don't know. I don't like hearing myself say it, but I feel like for a long time that's the way it was. And I feel like that's just a result of growing up with it. You know, my whole life, mass shootings have been a reality, you know, Aurora, Colorado, and all of those things before. I mean, I remember all of, you know, where I was when I heard about those shootings. And so when you grow up with that, it kind of just becomes like a part of life. And it's not something that should be a part of life. You know, people should be able to go about their lives every day without having to worry about getting shot.
So school shootings have become the seminal events in your lives, as were the assassination of Robert Kennedy or Martin Luther King, or the explosion of the Challenger, which was one of the first major crafts that, you know, went out and flew like a plane, which was something that, you know, we'd never seen before. Those things were the seminal events in my life. And another couple were two assassinations that took place in the 1980s, and that was assassination attempts, I should say. President Ronald Reagan's assassination attempt, and then the Pope John Paul II, within a few very short weeks of each other. And Jim Brady, who was, are you familiar with any of these names, or am I going way back in history for you? Okay. Jim Brady was one of the press secretaries for the Reagan administration, and he was shot in the head and badly injured and suffered a traumatic brain injury, and that's when the Brain Injury Association really started kicking into high gear, because Brady had this horrific thing happen to him as a result of the attempted assassination of his president, and he became partially paralyzed and had a lot of other, you know, really horrible things that happened to him. And the handgun bill that resulted, which took about, I think about 8 years or 9 years to get passed, was the basic bottom line for handgun matters until the NCIS came about. So what was it when we started background checks and we started actually, requiring training for people to get concealed carry permits or to purchase a gun? Things seemed to change. What was it that changed for you, Destiny? What was that turning point that you said, okay, I'm not numb anymore? I'm not going to, Fonz and I are not going to be numb. We're going to actually do something. What was different about Parkland?
I think, so by that time, I had already gotten into politics. I'd already been involved with rubber town issues and environmental issues in Louisville, so like a local social justice issues. So I already kind of had the backlaying skills and the knowledge of how to respond to these things.
Yes.
But there had been more shootings before Parkland, and I had never gotten involved. So I think what it was for Parkland was I was always environmentalist. I'd never been anything but environmentalist until March for Our Lives. And then when Parkland happened, students were standing up. It was the first time I ever saw, in my high school lifetime, I saw young people actually saying, okay, we're going to care about this. And I was like, okay, so it's not just environmental issues that we're going to care about now. So I decided I'm going to dedicate my time with this because people are caring and people are ready to say something. So I think for me personally, it was, I had the skills and I was ready to help this other cause, and I ended up getting really, really pushed into it and really devoted to it. But I think it was mostly it's not just, it's just another one. It was just one where people were just, I think, more tired of it now. And I think there was it was unifying across the nation for students. I think more than I've ever seen, just like studying other social justice movements. And I think that's why I personally stood up, is because everybody else was ready for it. And you could tell just the way people were talking about it all the time. It wasn't just something like, oh, did you see what happened on the news? People were talking about legislation. People were talking about politicians. It wasn't just like, oh, something happened. Oh, did you see what happened on the news? So I think that was another reason why I decided to stand up, because kids were looking at it at a different perspective, and it was time for me, I think.
It's interesting that we talked in the earlier interview that we were discussing the different parts of town that we live in. And there was a reference you were making to the East End, and you said you were in Butchertown and felt like, that was this unsafe area. And I said, well, I'm in Crescent Hill, and the East End to me is Hurstbourne Lane. You live in St. Matthews. You live in the Highlands, Jordan. You live in the Shawnee neighborhood, Marshall. Based upon the far south end and the central to East End and a good portion of the West End.
Yeah.
What's your experience been growing up in an area where, well, it's a little bit farther out from the downtown area, but the real gun violence has been the norm and not the exception?
Oh, okay. So, first I'd like to preface it by saying my parents did a very good job by, they always told me that gun violence was something that affected people not based on the proximity of...
I'm moving this up.
Okay,
There you
thank
go.
Gun violence was something that affected people not based on where you lived, but the people that you associated yourself with. So they always made sure that I kept myself out of the crowds of people that would associate me with getting myself shot one day. But
How did they do that?
they just sent me to schools where they knew that education would be my priority. If I ever brought home friends that they thought were up to nefarious activities, they made sure that I didn't see those people again.
Wow. That's right, good parents.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't still in the area, and it's something that's been prevalent. And when I do things like, I don't know, go to the park to play basketball or whatever, it's something that stays in your mind, because the park that's maybe 5 minutes from my home, Shawnee Park, a couple years ago, or was that last year, there was actually a shooting there of, I think, three people died during a yearly football game that happens every year. It's been a tradition for almost 50 years now.
Yeah.
And people were really just shocked by it, because it's been a family thing. It's been a family event for years, decades now, and people died there. So I think that really brought to the minds of people that this is an issue, and not only in our community, but in every community in America, and it's starting to affect families and people who nobody deserves to die, especially from gun violence. And people are finally starting to understand, especially in my neighborhood, how big of an issue it is, and politically trying to do things about it.
All right. Well, yeah. Follow up. That was an amazing statement, and I want to know how your parents vet your friends, because that's a key. That's one of the first steps that I know a lot of people have been talking about, is be aware of what's happening with your kids. Don't rely upon the schools to take care of everything for you. Go ahead, Destiny.
Yeah, just to add on to that. So, I think it was last school year. So when I was a sophomore, I live in the trailer park down across from Glengarry, and there was a shooting the street right across from my house. It was a homicide, and I think that's very common in Fayetteville now. I think more than when I was younger, and I've noticed that there's been a really increase, especially in the trailer park that I live in. It's almost yearly that we'll have a shooting just in that one small trailer park, and I think going off from how that kind of affected me in the March for Our Lives, because that's how I wasn't involved as much as the walkout, but March for Our Lives that we hosted. I remember when I first went to the meetings for March for Our Lives, for the planning meetings, there were only students from Manual, and there were only really students who had never experienced that before, and never had to drive down the street and see the yellow tape and not be able to get to your own street because of that issue, because of that type of stuff. And so I think when I got there, that was my biggest point. Everybody just wanted to talk about gun violence being only a school issue, and we're only going to talk about school shootings. And I think when I got onto March for Our Lives, I think that was the biggest thing. I wanted to make sure that people were actually talking about gun violence being every day in our own community. It was hard to, I don't think, it was really hard to get that through to people, that this was another big portion of it, especially with the Louisville March for Our Lives.
Did you feel like a lot of them were insulated?
You mean the people that
kids who were planning, did you feel like they had kind of an insulated or bubble lives as opposed to what you have shared that you've experienced?
I think that was definitely a concept of it, that they were definitely isolated from it all, but also the media wasn't focusing as much on street gun violence, community gun violence as they were at that time on school gun violence. So I think that was another thing that really swayed them, of just going with the national movement of schools and everything. But definitely when I got into March for Our Lives, that was the big thing that I wanted to make sure was important, and that I got through to all that. And that was the contribution that I really wanted to make to March for Our Lives.
Do you ever go to a park to play basketball and feel in fear of your life, Fonz?
No, I can't say that I do, and that's a privilege that I think is important, that a lot of students in my position need to recognize. And that's something that the students from Parkland, from Marjory, Stoneman, Douglas, did a really good job about doing, was realizing that the majority of them were white kids. The majority of them were kids who are, or at least the majority of the students who spoke up, the leaders of the national movement, are mainly white or Hispanic kids. And I also come from a Hispanic background. Both of my parents are immigrants from Mexico. But both of my parents are also highly educated, and my parents are doctors. So I've grown up in a position of privilege my whole life. And so I think it's important for students like myself, and not just students, all people, to recognize this privilege we have, to be able to use it to help other people. Because I don't live in a neighborhood where I get off the bus and I'm scared of being shot, but I know that that's the reality for a lot of other students.
Including Marshall?
Yeah, to be honest, this is, I don't know how many people have, moments like this, but I've known Marshall for 4 years, and I didn't know he lived in Shawnee until an hour ago when we started talking. So when you realize that the situation is so much closer to home, it's your friends, that you see every day, that they're in the same situation, it becomes just that much more important to you. And so, like I was saying earlier, at first, when school shootings happened, or mass shootings or shootings on TV that you hear from, WAVE or WHAS, it all feels distant. When you live in the east end of town, it all feels distant. It all feels like it's far away. It can't touch you, But when you begin to talk to students who face it every day, it becomes just that much more of an issue. It becomes just that much more personal. Something that you want to make sure doesn't happen again, because you don't want it to hurt your friends. And so I think that's something really important that we need to realize, that like Destiny was saying, it's not just a school issue. it's a community issue. And again,
Right.
the students from Stoneman Douglas did a really good job, especially like at the march in DC. You know, they had students from South LA and from Southside Chicago and from all these places, and they were saying, yeah, you know, like my brother got shot and killed on the street, you know, or I lost blah blah blah, or I, you know, I remember the first time I heard gunshots outside my house, you know, stuff like that. We're like, holy crap, you know,
Yeah.
I thought that's stuff that only happens in war zones. No, that's stuff that's happening
In the
here in the
movies.
United States, you know, so.
Yeah.
It's really important that we recognize that to be able to move forward and keep the momentum and keep this movement going and actually make change happen.
Okay, so I'm going to throw this out there. I've not heard a whole lot happening recently, which is why I wanted to do this interview. It's kind of, I call it a lull. And I feel like you all have the opportunity to kind of wake people up. So I'm going to throw this out as a general statement, and you alluded to this, Fonz, and based upon what you said, Marshall. There were some students who were in the African American student body at Parkland who did not agree with the approach that was being taken by the students who were leading March for Our Lives. And I'd love to hear a commentary from any of you on that. And secondly, I liked the fact that the Parkland students reached out to the kids in Chicago, because those people were dealing with shootings every day of their lives. It was nothing out of the ordinary. And they were saying, well, you know, the fact that you've mentioned white privilege, the schools that have had school shootings and mass shootings have typically been white urban schools, which is just amazing to many people who think, oh, everything that's bad that's happening has got to be in an area of town that, you know, is really awful and all these negative connotations are associated with it, but that's not necessarily true. So I'm just going to let you guys, whoever wants to go, just throw it out there and talk about it.
Well, actually, I hate doing this, but could you clear it up? Because I actually hadn't heard anything about that. What did the African American students at Stoneman Douglas, what particularly did they disagree with the approach that the students took to their protests?
There were some statements that were made by a small group of kids who were at Stoneman Douglas.
Okay.
And I think they were primarily concerned about the fact that the things that were going on in Chicago and elsewhere were primarily focused on black students, and it seemed like the only people who were stepping up and really leading, and may not have done it in a way that they agreed with, were the white kids.
Well, initially after the shooting, I think that they were just so focused on getting this to be to make it sure that this would not happen to any other school
Yes.
in the nation. And so after focusing on that, and then they realized, okay, well, this is happening to students walking home, or this is happening to students just, like Fawn said earlier, someone was eating cake in their house. And they're students, and it's not necessarily happening at school, but it's happening in their communities, and it's impacting the students' life, and it's impacting their friends' life, which impacts the whole school that they
Right.
come from. And so just realizing that this is not just a school issue, but a community issue, and it can happen anywhere and any time, as we've seen through the San Bernardino at work or the movie theater in Colorado. It's not just something that can happen from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. while you're sitting in a desk. It's something
Yes.
it can happen while you're reading a book in a library, or it's something that can happen while you are watching a movie. And it impacts everyone around you. And so I think that the students at Parkland, and I can't speak for them because I don't know any of them, and I don't know what their thought process was, but that they realized, okay, this isn't just about schools, but it's about how students live outside of school. And I think it was very mature and very good that they reached out to students who have been directly impacted by community gun violence.
Yeah, because I know Van Jones had an awesome, and you should look this up because it was a wonderful interview with the guys from Chicago and the guys from Stoneman Douglas, and the conversation that took place with the primarily African American students from Chicago and the primarily white students from Stoneman Douglas. It was an absolutely amazing interview. So Van Jones, don't forget that. Did you want to kick in on that too? You looked like you had something to say, and then it just kind of was like,
Yeah,
it's okay, throw something else out there.
Yeah, there's just so much that goes on in my head when I have these conversations. It's hard to pin something down, but
And isn't it a shame that you have to have these conversations?
yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
You know, you guys should be going out and partying and playing and having fun and playing your sports and doing your wonderful, you know, work for environmentalism, and that should be it. You shouldn't be dealing with these kinds of circumstances and situations, and yet, as you said, Fonz, this has been, you know, the run, fight, hide, fight has been part of your consciousness since you were children, little children. I mean, probably first grade.
Yeah, I remember the first like clear shooting I remember was the Sandy Hook shooting.
Yes.
And I think we were probably in 6th grade, and I think you would
I
have
was
been
probably in elementary school.
Yeah. So it's definitely been in our minds for a long time.
Yeah, it has. Do you feel at risk at school right now, Destiny?
I think personally at school, I do not as much. I think partially that is because I've had really good teachers, a couple of really good teachers who have like honestly like sat down and like said like if something were to happen, I would do anything, even if it meant I would like if I would die, I would do anything to protect you all.
Yes.
Which I think is a privilege that other schools might not have. So I think my teachers have done an amazing job of like just openly saying that they will do anything. But I think it's also because it's still mass shootings like that still feel different. It's not distant. They feel very distant. Everyday shootings like they happen a lot, but that's even distant to me because I stay in my own house. I don't leave my house. I stay with my group of friends. You know, I know that none of my friends would ever do that, even if it's happening right down the street. It's still distant. I still try to distance myself from that, of just telling myself it can never happen to me. And I think just with school shootings, I mean, it did happen in Kentucky. It did happen very close to us.
Several times.
And I remember, now that I remember, it was my freshman year too, in which a student did get suspended from manual for bringing a gun to school. So like it's just, it feels, you tell yourself it's distant because you don't want to be afraid, I think. So I think that's just another reason why I feel like it can never happen. I feel safe, but I feel like it's just, I feel safe because I want to feel safe more than anything.
Well, and you know, you said you have so much thinking, you're thinking about so many things, and questions just keep popping into my mind that I haven't even planned. I mean, I have this list that I haven't even looked at, but what are they doing at Manual that's making you feel safe, Marshall?
Oh, okay, so first off, like Fawn said earlier, I feel like our administration has proven to us and our security has proven to us that they would do anything, if it came down to it, that they would do anything to make sure that not a single student in the entire school is harmed. And that's really resonated with me. Like, I believe them wholeheartedly that they would do everything feasibly, humanly possible to make sure that no harm comes to us. But also, kind of alluding back to what has been stated earlier, I still, and I know I suffer from this, but I can't get out of that mindset. That mindset that like, oh, well, that's something that can't happen to us. And there's no real logic or tangible reasoning behind why a school shooting couldn't happen in Manual, say tomorrow. But everyone believes it. Like, they see a school shooting on the TV and they're like, that's terrible, that's horrible, but there's no way it could ever happen to me. Think about all the high schools that are in America and all the school shootings that there have ever been. Like, statistically, that's a thing that couldn't happen to me. And I kind of suffer from that too, because I'm like, well, I mean, it can't happen, but I mean, it's happened in our state this year. It's ever possible, like Fawn said, or was it Jordan, that we fit the mold of a school that would be susceptible to a school shooting. So.
And many years ago, Heath High School, where Michael Carneal came into school and killed a lot of people, which was in Kentucky as well. Mm-hmm. And the one in Owensboro a little bit earlier this year, which, you know, was almost concurrent with the Stoneman Douglas shootings. So, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. Were you finished with your thought?
No, I'm finished.
Okay. So I guess the question that I would like to ask is, what could be done to make you feel like you can go to school each day? Are you in favor of having armed guards in the schools? Do your resource officers carry guns? Are you in favor of metal detectors? How do you feel about locking down the doors when you come in?
I think a lot of the solutions that have been proposed recently by politicians and by people in our country have been a way to circumnavigate, the real issue, which is the fact that our country's gun legislation is extremely lacking. And we, as Americans, live in a very, very violent society. Our culture is very violent. Our culture is a very, all throughout history, even in Congress, politicians would have gun duels and like just our history. It's all about war and revolution and fighting for what you believe in. And so our what we've told ourselves for years is that like it's our right, it's our right to have guns and to defend ourselves and to protect ourselves, because if I don't defend myself, no one else will. And so I think that has led to deficiencies in our legislation, in our laws and what's meant to protect us. And so really, I think that the only thing that can prevent any more of these things is to have gun legislation, which makes it harder, if not impossible, to purchase weapons that could help carry out a mass shooting. And I think first we have to start small. I think it's it would not be reasonable to think that we could just start banning guns. That's not going to happen. Right now. It'll take a long time for that to happen, but I think there are definitely steps that we can take to start going in that direction. And I think the big steps are, first of all, banning bump stocks, which is a relatively new thing. But I've heard there've been movements in the past to ban bump stocks, which I didn't know. I didn't even know they were a thing. And also banning high capacity magazines. Mm-hmm. I think those are two really important things that are good first steps to getting to that goal. But then later on in the future, for sure, banning assault-style weapons. There's no reason anyone like you and I should be able to have one of those. Even if your argument is that you like hunting, you can't eat an animal after you shoot it with an assault-style rifle. So what's the point of having it? Honestly, I think that's the only thing that could prevent this from happening again.
Jordan, you look like you're ready to jump right in there. You go for it.
Well, I just had a lot of thoughts while he was talking. So there's been a lot of politicians have been urging a lot of distraction methods, including what you said earlier, metal detectors and arming teachers with weapons. And though those can make schools safer, they make school more of a prison and more of like you're going into a jail rather than a place where people learn and people create friendships and relationships. And I can talk on about why teachers shouldn't be armed, but the real method of, in my opinion, to eliminate or reduce these school shootings is what Fonz was saying, to decrease and to restrict who can have a weapon and what accessories they can purchase, because mental health is an issue, but it's pairing the mental health with who can buy a gun, because a lot of what we've seen is trends with people who have had backgrounds of mental health illnesses, but and they've been able to purchase a gun, but also people who have been able to purchase a gun have purchased a high capacity weapon, have developed mental illnesses, and so you can't just say, okay, we're just going to reduce and decrease and help the people with mental illnesses. You have to fight what's the cause, and in my opinion, that's the guns.
Well, and I've been
to piggyback off of what both Jordan and Fonz said. Obviously, the proposed legislation that has been proposed as a solution to stopping school shootings is a Band-Aid, it's a workaround, and it won't actually accomplish anything. And my personal belief is by allowing teachers to carry guns in school, by introducing armed guards in school, not only would it make school more of a prison, it makes schools more dangerous.
Yeah.
It makes us more susceptible to gun violence, because If you have more guns in schools, gun violence is only going to be more common. It introduces so infinitely many more variables for students to be able to be harmed by guns that it would only make the issue more pervasive, and it would send us in the opposite direction.
So your school resource officers at Manual do not carry guns?
We do not have armed officers.
You don't have armed officers
We have
in
a
schools?
security guard.
Security guard. One?
We have a couple.
2.
For how many students?
2,000, roughly 2,000.
Yeah.
So one security person for each 1,000 students.
Yeah.
So-
And then the teachers
Yeah, and then the teachers.
and staff, of
And
course.
staff.
Well, I can tell you that my friend who's a teacher, when this happened at Parkland, was talking to me, and I said, I hope that you would, get out as quickly as possible if a situation like that ever occurred at your school. And she said, as soon as my kids are safe, which goes back to what you were saying, that your teachers would, lay their lives on the line. And it's not something that they signed on to do when they signed their contracts. So then we get back to the topic that you brought up, Jordan, of mental health, which is something that I've been really involved in myself, especially now that I work at Bridgehaven Mental Health Services. And I think that one of the things that has been said, and I have someone who is very interested in talking about this, and I'll mention her statement, was that you have to keep people with mental illness from buying guns, just like you have to keep all other people who may become homicidal from buying guns. And she said that's through background checks and proper training in the use of weapons. But coming back to the bump stocks and the assault style rifles, her belief is very strong that nobody needs that kind of weapon except someone who's in the military or possibly in law enforcement.
I don't even think the police need them.
Yeah.
I think I actually have a kind of contradictory opinion to that a little bit, for the fact of I've had a lot of discussions about these issues, especially with people who do have differing opinions, and the fact of considering of personally, there's some powers that I don't want the government to have on their own. A lot of communities, personally, especially at this time where we deal with the idea of police brutality and other issues, personally, I don't want to be without a gun and police officers to have a gun, and the government to have a gun, and I not have a gun. And when I look, I idolize the Black Panther Party and people similar to that who use their right to the Second Amendment to protect their neighborhoods when the government wouldn't, and when the government was fighting against them. And so for me personally, especially with the way our current presidential administration is, I want my right to have a gun. Even maybe there's certain things that do go the line of too powerful, but I feel that when you take that right away from community members and your people to protect themselves against a possible military that might go really fascist, or a possible military that might start doing some really bad stuff, like I think what the Black Panthers did, of using their guns to show the police that we're not going to take police brutality in Oakland anymore. We're not going to take this anymore. I personally feel that when the government is able to take that right of self-defense away from you, that it opens them to so many more possibilities. So I'm pretty strong Second Amendment for that fact of I don't want the government to have the power to take that away from me, but I do feel like there are laws that need to be made to restrict certain people who have certain crimes to do it. There needs to be logging of guns and cataloging of serial numbers and who has them and all the time. But taking away certain things, I feel that it goes too much into my own protection against a government that I don't know where they're going anymore.
Real quick, Marshall, where does the line between security and freedom fall? Because after 2000, after 9/11 in 2001, things changed rapidly and dramatically at airports. And suddenly we were being searched. Suddenly we had to have identification that, well exceeded what had been previously asked for. Suddenly we had, you could only take 2 ounces of toothpaste with you instead of 6, or whatever it was. And there was huge modification to the security plan. So people were saying, well, I don't mind being searched an extra, amount, because that means that I'm going to be able to get to my destination. Where does the line between freedom and security fall?
Well, that is a question, and not to detract from your question, but that might be one of the most subjective questions you can ask.
Sure.
It just depends on the person, and it depends greatly on how trusting that person is and the good nature of other people. It depends on how trusting they are of their government officials around them to protect them, the laws that are in place to protect them, and how comfortable they are that the government won't go overboard with security over freedom and start to infringe upon their freedoms. And for me personally, I don't really know because it changes on different issues. So for issues like airports, I kind of support like, hey, maybe we need to be searched just a little bit more. Don't fill me up too much, but search me just a little bit more just to make sure that nothing nefarious is going on this plane. But for issues like guns, I'm way more on the restrictive side because I understand that this is something that when anybody has access to it, it can become a huge issue and it can affect the safety of the entirety of the public. So I know I really didn't answer your question.
No, you're
so
fine.
I think I'm going to sum it up by saying I think the line between infringing upon safety versus freedom falls upon when a person or a party has the ability to act upon the safety of those around them, then I think all measures should be taken to prevent them from doing such.
Yeah, I actually kind of going off of, not even really going off of what Marshall says, but just looking at Marshall's answer, we can see like how complex of an issue this is. You know, it's not about even just citizens' rights to own a gun, but I think there are a lot, you know, this issue, the issue of gun violence, has so many, it's such broad an issue that so many other issues fit within its umbrella, you know. So like Destiny touched on police brutality, and you before said that this person thought that only military or law enforcement should have military-style weapons, and I actually, you know, maybe the military, if that, but, you know, like, police officers should not have military-style weapons. We should not have, you know, people on our streets, you know, who can, you know, who have that power. Like Marshall was saying, when someone, you know, can act on you know, a feeling, then it's not good. And while I do, you know, I have faith in government and I have faith in law enforcement. I know there are people who do not, and so I definitely recognize that as, you know, like some people are scared of what the government or what the military, what the police could do, but at the same time, it's very, very hard for me to think that violence is ever the answer. And you know, I mean, I guess Dr. King is our greatest and best example of that. You know, everything he accomplished with, you know, speaking and dialogue and opening conversation. I think that's what we need to do right now. Instead of brandishing our weapons at one another, instead of saying, you know, I'm not going to back down with my gun, I think we should instead be saying, I'm not going to back down with my words. And that's actually been something that my eyes have been open to, you know, recently after all of these things happened. I've been able to have so many more fruitful conversations with people who disagree with me, and just being receptive to what people say and to what people think. You know, just me being respectful and telling them why I hold this position. You know, some of them have, you know, we finish the conversation and they'll say, I really didn't think about it that way.
Sure.
And when you have these conversations, like, you know, the way that we're having a conversation now, instead of being like, oh, but what you're saying is wrong and all of this, it's so much better and so much easier and so much more peaceful.
Yes.
And people are so much less likely to get hurt.
And that's what I loved about the fact that Destiny said what she felt about having her Second Amendment rights, and you saying something completely differently, but nobody's come to blows yet, which is a great way to be. Wanted to let you know that one of the folks who's watching said, really impressed with these students and their mature thinking and enacting on their beliefs. She also wants to know if you've thought about personal safety plans, courses of action you've actually thought through beyond what you've been told, and if you will, Jordan, because you've been kind of quiet for the last few minutes, tell us what you're taught in school about what happens if there's an active shooter.
So actually, after the Parkland shooting, they implemented a new drill. It's called the ALICE drill, and it's an acronym. I forgot what each letter stands for, but basically it's, if whatever classroom you're in, you have a different plan of action, and it's more active than passive. So instead of, you know, in the past we were just told to go into a corner, turn all the lights off, and just hide there and be silent. But now we are told to either escape or actually in one of my classes we were told to stab the shooter with scissors.
Run, hide, fight.
Right. And so it's...
So let me tell you what it is. Alert, lockdown, inform, counter, evacuate. Those are the 5 stages of Alice.
Yeah, so, and the drill we had, it was during our 4th period or 4th block, and so whoever teacher you were with, they told you what to do. And so everyone was different. My teacher decided to go and fight the shooter, and then I know some other people I've talked to, they were told just to hide. But, so I think that schools are realizing that this is an issue that could happen to them, and that they're taking new action. But also, even before the Parkland shooting, I have always gone into my class and thought, or just wherever I am, and just thought, okay, so if a shooter comes in, I'm gonna escape this way. And I think it's just really sad that we have to think like that, and think that way. And recently I've been like thinking when I'm leaving my house, this could be like the last time I say bye to my mom or something. And I know I'm not the only one that thinks that way, and this needs to be taken care of, and our schools are helping to make sure that if something does happen, we know what to do. But it's definitely something that I think about a lot.
So a social worker friend of mine said that in 1st grade, in the first 30 minutes of a child entering the classroom, we could identify the kids who are going to be at risk by watching what happens with them interacting with other students, interacting with the teacher, by their expressions, by the way they've behaved. Have you encountered kids in your life from the earliest days on up till now that you feel could be that shooter?
Yeah, I can touch on that one. I think so. I didn't go to the best elementary school. I did not go to the best elementary school. Didn't learn long division. Didn't learn a lot of things. That
well, you know you have to use long division for many, many years when you could become an adult. So that's disastrous.
I know. I got to middle school. I didn't know how to do anything. But I didn't go to the best elementary school, and I actually had that encounter multiple times. I remember we were in the morning circle, and some kid pulled a knife out on another kid, and he had to go to stop. But he was back in a couple weeks, and
he had to go to what?
Stop.
What's
it
that?
It was like I think that was the day program, where you go to stop for the day.
Okay.
And then eventually he moved to another school for a week. I think they call it. I think it's Liberty. I don't know which one it is, but they go to another school for
like
a
an
week.
alternative school.
Alternative school for a week, and I've thought a lot about that, especially with like why was he back so soon, and why was nothing happening. I went to a school where parents were involved. Like a lot of the kids aren't of higher income. Parents aren't really involved in the education. They didn't really do well in school, and now all the kids in my neighborhood, like they're doing drugs, and they're like not focusing on like their future at all. And like I just always think, why is it still like this? Like if we already went through STOP, if they already went through these other school programs, why are they still in this cycle of doing drugs like their parents did?
What's being missed?
Yeah, why are we doing this? And I think I really think about that a lot, especially which is the way our justice system is in Louisville right now. And like we have insanely high crime rates right now, especially amongst young people. I think I was reading earlier before I came in here that the average age of somebody that's murdered now is 26, which is 3 years younger than what it was in years past. So it's just getting younger and younger. So where is that cycle? Why is it speeding up? Why is the cycle of crime speeding up in our communities? And I think we're just going about it all wrong. Like why was I able to spot that out, that there was a kid who's probably going to be a troubled child when I was in like 3rd grade, and now he still is. Like now he still lives in like a neighborhood close to me, and he's still doing the same things. And I think, like, for example, the gang bill, HB 169, that recently passed with approval from our current mayor, it's something that is just going to imprison young people for being involved with gangs, when that's not what we're talking about young people. These are people that need to be put back in school, not put in prison, that need to be put in work programs, where maybe they learned a vocational skill, or where they're in an internship program, even though we recently ended the one that we had. I think it was called, I can't remember, we had a youth program for intervening with kids that were involved with crime, but that was canceled because of some shady stuff. I can't remember what it was called in Louisville, but those programs like that are being cut in Louisville right now. They're not being pushed, and we just allowed for HB 169 to get passed, the gang bill. And I think that's like why, because we want to label people as being criminals at a young age instead of like focusing on restorative things or rehabilitating people and actually pushing it so we're actually going to community levels and helping people. And that's just something I think about a lot with our local government more than anything. It's just not focusing on the root problem at all.
Fonz?
Yeah, so I think that this whole notion that's been passed a lot by some politicians, that why aren't students looking out for these other students, these troubled children,
Yes.
Is extremely, extremely unfair. You know, there's always going to be troubled students. There's always going to be troubled kids, and you know, like Destiny was touching on, it's, you know, a much bigger problem. It's a social, it's a cultural issue that needs to be dealt with, and like Destiny's saying, it's something that we're ignoring. But I agree with her in that, but I also agree with her in the fact that you know, we want to label these young kids as criminals instead of helping them. And I think that's an extremely big issue. But I think the other big issue with this is that we're not letting other students, you know, focus. When we suggest that students should be looking out for other students, first of all, we're not letting students focus on being in school and being students and being kids. But second of all, we're putting labels on each other that shouldn't be the labels we're putting on each other. And so, yeah, so I think it's incredibly unfair. I think it's counterproductive and something that we shouldn't be doing. Honestly, I don't know. That kind of question, that thing always is that it makes me upset. And I was speaking to Audrey Champelli, and another of the students who was involved with the walkout at school, about this a few months back, and you know, she is, you know, someone who really helped me form this idea, and she was talking about how, like, it's unfair that as students we have to be wary of each other,
Yes.
which is something that we should not have to be.
That's
And,
right.
and really, I don't think, I'm not wary of anybody, and I don't think anyone is, and so the notion that we should be, I think, is just completely incorrect.
I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
Where did you go to grade school?
Kennedy Montessori,
And middle school?
Mazik Middle School.
And now you're at Manual.
Yes, no.
Grade school.
I went to St. Agnes, kindergarten, 8th grade.
I went to Great House for elementary and Barrett for middle school.
I went to Coral Ridge, and then I went to
Are any of those at-risk schools?
I think Coral Ridge.
Coral Ridge is?
Kennedy might be. Mazik probably is.
So the question that I have, that because you've been quiet for a few minutes, and so we've got to get you
Okay.
talking here.
All right.
When we talk about the fact that you guys are observing the news,
Mm-hmm.
and you are quoting statistics about how many people are being shot and what the ages are of these people being shot, and the desire to eliminate any kind of bump stock or assault style rifle from anyone but the military, and being able to watch and observe what the children are who are living with you and working with you in the place that you spend more time than you spend doing anything else, including being with your parents or sleeping for the most part. From the perspective of a student who is living in Shawnee,
Okay.
as opposed to Fairdale, there with Destiny, and St. Matthews and the Highlands,
Mm-hmm.
what is the responsibility of teachers in these schools who are bringing together a widely diverse group of kids? What is the responsibility of teachers in leveling all of you guys out so that you're all dealing on the same plane with the same issues? So what I really want to hear from the two of you guys on the end here, from Marshall and from Destiny, is do you feel like when you go into school, because you're from Fairdale and from Shawnee, that you are different or thought of differently or looked at differently from other students, more suspiciously? Are you literally profiled as being the guys who are going to be the problem causers because you're not from St. Matthews and from the Highlands? I mean, these are really strong questions, but I really want to know.
No. I would probably say if I were to be profiled, it'd be more having to do with my skin tone and my gender than where I live. And to tie back to the question of what do teachers have to do, I think that's a very difficult question. My mom's actually a teacher, an elementary school teacher, and she has to deal with this a lot because she teaches kindergarten students, and she teaches at Coleridge Taylor Elementary, which is kind of centered in one of the last remaining project of Louisville, Beecher Terrace.
Yes.
And so she has a very it's a weird group of people because you have a lot of the neighborhood kids who come from families living in those projects. They're lower income. A lot of them have fathers and mothers who are just not in their lives. A lot of them have siblings, parents, grandparents that are imprisoned or are strung out on drugs. But since it's one of only 2 Montessori schools in the county, the other one being Kennedy, the elementary school that I went to,
Yes.
there's also a lot of kids from out in the East End that come to the school because their parents value the Montessori education.
Yes.
So she has to work on showing the kids and finding a medium where everyone understands each other, everyone keeps an open mind and understands that no matter what area you come from, no matter what income your parents may have, no matter how many of your family members may be imprisoned, no matter the education level that your parents may have achieved, you're all worth the same, and you all have the same potential to do great things. Because a lot of the kids that come from the neighborhood of Beecher Terrace, they have this really somber outlook on themselves because they have this understanding that like, oh, my potential is lower than those of the people around me, and I'm not going to be able to do as great things. And my mom has to constantly reassure these children that they can do great things, no matter what hardships present themselves in front of them.
So parents are in media, parents are doctors. What do your folks do? Destiny.
I can't remember what my dad does something with cars, I think. And my mom is a warehouse worker at UPS.
Okay. Bullying. This is a big topic that everybody's talking about, again, like mental illness. What value is the bullying curriculum that is being taught in schools having, and how is it possibly preventing things like the Parkland school shootings from happening, or is it ineffective in your opinion? Because you came from a part of town where you've expressed to us that things have not always been great.
Yeah. I don't think there's a bullying curriculum. Is there a bullying curriculum?
Well, it's teaching kids about not
Okay.
not allowing
That is
others
okay.
to bully, and what you shouldn't do and how
yeah.
you should not behave because it's bullying behavior.
Yeah, I think I remember that a lot more in elementary school rather than middle. Once I got to
Right.
middle school, it wasn't much of a problem. High school now, for me personally, I don't really socialize as much, but for me now in high school, it's definitely, I think, less of a problem. But I think some of the things, especially when it was in elementary school, and there was a lot of kids that were very different from each other because that's just how young kids are. Some kids are really hyper, some kids are really, really chill. Other kids are just, they're just kids, and they're all so different. I think that's where a lot of bullying did start. A lot, especially because kids say what they want, especially even if it hurts other people's feelings about how other kids look or how other kids talk or do certain things. And now that I think about it, especially when you asked about, do you recognize children that might end up being kids that end up in crime or other type of things? And now when I think about it, they were the kids that got bullied and didn't have any friends, and nobody talked to them, and so I just that just clicked right now whenever you mentioned the bullying thing. But I also agree with Fonz, we shouldn't have an obligation to be thinking about that and be responsible for those types of things. We shouldn't have to even think about that or label each other that way. And I think it's kind of wrong to think that kids should label other kids that way.
And another teacher said in a commentary to me, we shouldn't be responsible for that either.
Parents?
the teachers should not be responsible for, number one, keeping kids safe from shooters, and number two, teaching them the things that they needed to learn when they were very small children. And it's unfortunately because we've had a situation occur in recent cultural phenomenon of lots of one-parent households, working parents' households, and the responsibility being basically placed upon teachers to replace a lot of parents.
I think without teachers, though, I would not be where I am today.
Amazing.
Without that, because I stayed after school so much and just sat and talked with them, and they waited until my mom got home. Without teachers, I would not be where, with going that extra step, definitely would not be where I am today.
So Brian Monsma, Evan Stoner's watching us. Do you guys know Evan?
He's my neighbor.
I thought so. Kurt Lawson, Lisa Smalley, thank you for being with us. Joy Estestano, O'Brien, Courtney Gray, who is amazing. She's an animal control officer, so she has to control people as much as she does animals. And Kathy Travis Leslie, Susan Watkins, Lee Balcom. Thank you guys for watching with us. And I'm going to wrap up, and I hate to wrap up because I want to talk to you guys for hours, and I could keep you here for an hour, but Fonz, the percussionist, is about ready to come out of his skin, I can tell. Just briefly, you're wearing a Northwestern shirt.
Northeastern, yes.
Northeastern, I'm sorry. Tell me about it.
So this is where I will be attending university next year, up in Boston. And this actually just came in the mail on Saturday,
Awesome.
And I made my decision to attend there last week or the week before, and I'm incredibly excited and incredibly, I feel incredibly privileged and blessed to have the opportunity to even go to college.
What do you want to do?
I want to study emerging media and something probably either public policy or accounting.
Fantastic. Jordan?
I'm heading to North Carolina next year. I'm going to attend Queen's University of Charlotte, North Carolina. And I am going to double major in journalism and environmental sustainability.
Marshall?
I'm going down to Lexington at the University of Kentucky. I'll be studying civil engineering, and I might be double majoring in political science.
That's why he wore blue today, guys, if you're wondering. Destiny?
I'm a junior, so...
You don't have to worry about it for another year, right?
Yeah. But I guess, since you turned out I have a co-op at U of L, so I start my first semester this summer.
Great.
So I get to take a lot of really, 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 really cheap classes at U of L.
That's really super.
I guess
That's
I'm a
good.
U of L student.
There you go. Audrey Champelli, thank you. I know you're probably not able to watch because you had a school newspaper emergency, which happens to the best of us. She was going to be here with us today, and I'm so sorry that you couldn't because I was waiting to meet you. But thanks for lining these guys up for me. It's been fantastic being able to talk to them. And Michael, don't push the button yet. Our photographer. Thank heavens you brought Michael with you. He's such an awesome photographer. He starts and stops just perfectly. The last thing I really want you guys to say is, and we talked about this in the last interview, if you could say something to your younger self about your experience in the March on Washington, and you were encouraging somebody to follow in your footsteps, what would that be, Destiny?
So I was with the march at Louisville, actually.
Okay.
But I think, I know a lot of people are always scared to take the first step of being in politics or saying or speaking at a rally or just going and having a conversation and saying, hey, can I help you plan that rally or can I help you plan that walkout? And I think never be afraid to just go out and be assertive, 101, be assertive, and put yourself out there. Just never be afraid. And when you're doing social activism work and political work, never stop. Even when you think you're done, never stop. When you lose, never stop. Keep being mad. Keep going and getting mad at whoever did that. Keep making sure the conversation keeps going. So just never stop with what you're doing and never be too afraid to go out there, because if you're not the one going out there, because everybody's afraid of the same thing. Everybody's afraid to step out there. So if you're not doing it, then literally no one will, because it's likely an issue that people aren't talking about. So just never be afraid and never stop doing what you're doing.
Younger Marshall, what's he going to hear from you?
Don't be afraid to speak up, because everybody's got some strong opinions, some that they're passionate about, and that opinion is as valid as anybody else's. And if you're educated enough on the opinion, and if you're passionate enough about it, that you think you want other people to hear it, don't be afraid to speak it. Somebody will listen to you.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Uh,
Fonz.
I would probably tell a younger me, don't be afraid to do and try as many things as you can, and talk to as many people as you can, see as many things as you can. You know, I feel very strongly that experiences are, you know, what life is about, and knowing people and knowing things and doing things is, you know, what we're supposed to do, and if you can do those things and help other people and improve the world while doing them, then why not?
Jordan.
Well, for the March of Our Lives, I think I would tell myself to don't be afraid to use social media. I mean, that was one of our biggest things that the group that went to Washington, D.C. used to help promote what we were doing and also get the word out there about the issue of gun violence. And we actually contacted many students at Parkland, and now we have this bond with some students at Parkland. And Fonz is actually really good friends with one of the students. But it's just been really neat to see how social media can connect us to all different people in all across the nation and even the world. Like our teacher, our journalism teacher, was able to connect us with like MSNBC and like the BBC, and so it was just really interesting. And I look at social media now more as a tool than just like a way to like connect with my friends.
Yes.
And I think
It's a very powerful tool.
yeah, especially right now, and I think it's only going to increase the use of it. So.
Well, that's why we're doing this today. Thank you guys for watching us today. We really appreciate you, and your comments are very important, and you're welcome to comment after the fact. And I will get answers from these guys and then get back to you, so don't worry. So thank you so much, Destiny Grigsby and Fawn Cerveza, Jordan Grants and Marshall Washington. And thank you, Audrey Champelli, for helping us out. And thanks to the wonderful teachers and administrators at Manual for putting me together with all of you and for teaching you and taking care of you. And continue with the great things that you're doing in your life. And it's just been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
See you on Wednesday.